Our last discussion focused on the ways in which Rome comes increasingly to engage with the Greek world and the political and military dynamics that lead from Rome's initial encounters with mainland Greece to eventually Roman domination of mainland Greece about a generation, 2 generations later. One of the key moments in this is the moment that is described right here by Livy. This is the moment when the Roman general Titus Quinctius Flamininus proclaims the freedom of Greece. And this is a moment that shows quite strongly the Roman sense that the Greek world is something that ought to be distinct from Rome. It does not, Rome does not, in the early part of the 2nd century, really want to be deeply involved in the Greek world. But what we see is that Greeks, as Rome becomes more and more influential, Greeks become very interested in getting involved in things going on in the city of Rome itself. And this starts even before the military conflicts between Rome and Macedon make Rome a military player in the mainland Greek and Asia Minor city-states of the Greek world. Even as early as 219 BC, we see this description of the interactions with Greek culture in the Roman environment. So the historian Cassius Hemena, one of the most ancient writers, this is the thinker Pliny writing in the 1st century AD, writing about a 2nd century BC historian. Cassius Hemena, Pliny says, is the authority for the statement that the first physician who came to Rome was Archigothus, the son of Lysanias, who came over from the Peloponnese in the 535th year of the city. This is 219 BC. Hemena also states that the Roman citizenship was granted to him and that he had a shop provided for his practice at public expense. And so this quotation is quite interesting because it shows the interest and, in a way, the eagerness that Rome, which is culturally and technologically backwards compared to the Greek world, the eagerness and willingness that Rome has to embrace the techniques and practices of the more culturally sophisticated and medically sophisticated Greeks. But what we also see is that there's a similar readiness to extend interest and to adapt to Greek cultural, artistic, and literary aspects in other parts of Roman life as well. A similar eagerness to embrace the Greek extends to Greek art, Greek literature, Greek oratory. And to give some examples of this, we see that the first Roman historian, a man named Fabius Pictor, wrote about his time and the events of the Second Punic War. Fabius Pictor is a Roman historian. He's a Roman senator. But it's notable that when he decided to write a history, he wrote in Greek. Because Romans were becoming more acquainted with Greek, Romans were becoming more acquainted with the literary styles and forms of the Greek world. But it was also understood by this first generation of Romans that Greek was the language of the cultivated classes. And if you were writing a work of literature like Fabius Pictor's history that referred to and borrowed from Greek historians, you would write it in Greek because that's just a natural thing to do. One particular aspect of Greek culture that particularly influenced Romans was Greek oratory. And a lot of this has to do with the way that Greeks used oratory in a democratic context. So Greeks, because of their experience with democracy, had developed a great deal of skill in training people to speak publicly in a way that's persuasive and also artful. And so when Rome came to interact with the Greek world, a lot of these teachers came to Rome to teach Romans to speak effectively as well. And of course, Rome is also a democracy. It's a representative democracy as opposed to a direct democracy like classical Athens. But it's still a place where the power of oratory is something that can allow you to excel, develop a reputation for yourself, and make yourself incredibly important in political life. So Tacitus, writing in the 1st century, end of the 1st century, early 2nd century AD, talks about this. He says that the more influence a man could wield by his powers of speech, the more readily did he attain to high office. The farther did he, when in office, outstrip his colleagues. The more did he gain favor with the great authority with the Senate. And the more did he acquire reputation and fame with regular people. But without eloquence, it was impossible for anyone to attain a position of distinction and prominence in the community. It was also impossible for him to maintain this position. What Tacitus is saying is that oratory, specifically these skills that were developed in the classical world by Greek thinkers and Greek practitioners, like, say, the rhetorician Gorgias or the politician Demosthenes, these tools were things that Romans absorbed and came to use and came to understand because they were useful in a Roman context as well. But Romans were doing these things through interaction with the Greek world. And this sums up the powerful effect that training in oratory could have in a Roman environment. It also shows the degree to which Roman life is getting increasingly impacted by Rome's interaction with the Greek world as we get into the 2nd century. But what we see is this is not an easy and seamless process, because while many Romans embrace Greek culture and embrace the Greek legacy and embrace the forms of expression that Greeks had pioneered and developed, there's also a fiercely anti-Greek reaction by some of the people who either suspected the influence of Greeks or alternatively couldn't master these skills themselves. And the reaction is quite interesting. So if we turn our attention back to Archigathus, what we see is Pliny describing for us how Archigathus was a remarkable healer of wounds. And at the beginning, his arrival in Rome was extraordinarily welcome. But soon afterwards, from his cruelty in cutting and cauterizing, he acquired the name carnifex, executioner or butcher, and he brought his art into disrepute. And so what this shows is a Roman reaction to Greek medicine that comes from not really understanding how Greek medicine works. This is a new form. It's a new cultural form. It's a prestigious form. And that's why Rome embraces Archigathus so strongly. But they also don't really understand what he's doing. And ancient medicine is something that is brutal. You can see from this painting from Pompeii, surgery and surgical procedures are done in antiquity with the person awake. There is no anesthesia. There is also no sterilization of instruments. It's something that we, in a modern context, would know is a particularly problematic way to practice medicine. And so while Archigathus has considerable skills in practicing in Greek medical, according to Greek medical standards, Archigathus also is not going to be successful all the time. That's true even now. Doctors are not successful in treating people all of the time. Sometimes their patients die. Sometimes surgical sites get infected. This happens now. It happened much more regularly in antiquity. But Romans don't understand this. What they see in Archigathus is a figure who promises them all of the glory of Greek science and Greek medicine. And what he delivers is something that falls far short of what they expect. And so there's a really prominent and really strong reaction against him, where he's eventually called butcher simply because the techniques are things that Romans didn't particularly understand. The same is true of Roman reactions to rhetoricians. So Archigathus comes in 219 BC. This is a reaction that we see to philosophers and rhetoricians in 161 BC. And so Suetonius describes this. In the consulship of Gaius Fannius Strabo and Marcus Valerius Massala, this is 161 BC, the praetor, Marcus Pomponius, laid a proposition before the Senate. Now, we've talked a little bit about praetors, but praetors basically are the figures in the Roman Republic who are charged with implementing the laws. They basically interpret the legal tradition and the legal system and legal structures of the Roman Republic, and then they apply those laws, and they are the people who basically will prosecute individuals and interpret the laws and how those laws affect people in practice. And so when Pomponius puts a proposition before the Senate, what he's saying is this. Speeches were made about philosophers and rhetoricians, and the Senate decreed on this matter as follows, that Marcus Pomponius the praetor should take heed and provide as he deemed best, in accordance with the interests of the state and with his own good faith, that philosophers and rhetoricians should not be allowed to live in Rome. And so what we see here is, again, a really strong reaction against the presence of Greeks in Rome and the dominance or the influence that Greek culture is beginning to have in the Roman environment. This is not like what happened to Archigothus, because people are not actually dying from philosophy and rhetoricians, from philosophers and rhetoricians practicing in Rome. But what is happening is the Roman way of doing things is changing. And there is a reaction to this because, like the Roman suspicion of Greek medicine, there is both an acknowledgement of the power of what Greek teachers are bringing to Rome and a suspicion of what this will mean in the long run for Rome. This is a reactionary position. And this reflects a more general Roman attitude exemplified by everyone's favorite Roman reactionary. This is Cato the Elder. Now, Cato's attitude towards Greeks was one that underlined, or that was consistent with the suspicions we see of both Greek medicine and Greek rhetoricians and philosophers in those previous passages. What Cato says is, when we talk about Greeks, I will speak to you in the proper place, and I will show you that the results of my own experience in Athens are these. It is good to dip into their literature, but it is not good to learn it thoroughly, because the Greeks are a most iniquitous and intractable people, and you may take my word as the word of a prophet. Whenever that nation shall bestow its literature upon us, it will corrupt everything, and all the sooner if it sends its physicians here, because they have conspired among themselves to murder all foreigners with their medicine. And Cato says, and here is a way in which we know that they don't like us, that they're that they have bad intentions as they look towards us and bring these influences to Rome. Because the Greeks call us barbarians, and they stigmatize us more foully than other people by giving us the appellation of Opiki, a barbarian tribe of Oskans. Now, what we have here is a very strong reaction to society changing. What Cato is saying is, if you look around at what's happening in Rome during this period, and you'll see that these Greek influences coming from a place that we are continually fighting in a place that we are defeating in war, but is not staying subjected to. It's not staying reduced. It's not staying loyal. It's not upholding its principles. Part of this general pattern of Greeks causing problems for us is something that we also see with these Greeks who are coming to Rome. They're a threat that's not all that dissimilar from the political activities in Greece that keep drawing Roman armies back into Greece to fight. Instead, what you see is a kind of conspiracy where Greek literature is coming into Rome, Greek philosophy is coming into Rome, and most importantly, Greek medicine is coming into Rome. And all of these things, in Cato's view, have a negative impact on Rome. Greek literature corrupts us and prevents us from maintaining Roman virtue, and Greek medicine quite literally kills us. They have conspired using these Greek doctors to murder us. And so if they can't beat us in war, they will instead do a kind of secret operation where they send these agents over to corrupt Rome and make Rome weaker. And in that way, they will defeat us when they can't defeat us militarily. Now, this is, on one level, a very, very extreme position. But on another level, this reactionary view towards Greeks and Greek medicine and Greek philosophy and Greek culture is something that a lot of Romans identified with because their society was changing rapidly. And when that society changed rapidly, there were people who got it. There were people who could adapt to this Greek literature. There were people who could understand why Greek medicine was useful. They could understand why Greek philosophy gave a more nuanced approach to life. But not everybody shared that. And as more Romans embraced these Greek ideas that were not inherently Roman, other Romans who didn't understand or didn't accept or didn't acknowledge the importance or the positive contributions of these Greek influences reacted because their world was changing so quickly. And what Cato does is, quite cynically, he embodies this reaction. Cato is very, very popular as a reactionary politician in the 2nd century BC because the Roman world is changing so quickly. And what Cato understood is he could give voice to those concerns, he could legitimate the discomfort that people were feeling, and he could point to a sense that Rome was spinning out of control, that these people shared even if they couldn't articulate exactly why it concerned them. And so what Cato is able to do is to take this discomfort and channel it towards anger towards other people. And this movement against Greeks is part of this feeling by Romans that the world is changing too quickly and someone has to be responsible for it. And so what Cato is doing here is demagoguing against immigrants, demagoguing against Greek cultural leaders, demagoguing against people who have things positively to offer to Rome, attributes and skills and techniques that make Rome better. In the past, these sorts of attributes and techniques and skills would be welcomed by Romans. The extension of citizenship to Archigothers is something Romans had done for centuries. For 500 years, we have examples of Romans bestowing citizenship on people because those people have something to offer their society. And Archigothers is one of a long line of immigrants who had something to offer Roman society and got citizenship because of it. What Cato is doing is saying that this is wrong. Our society is changing too quickly, and we can't keep doing this kind of thing. But he dresses this rejection of skilled immigrants up as Roman tradition, when in fact, this is a significant break with Roman tradition. Roman tradition historically welcomed people like Archigothers. It welcomed people like the philosophers and the rhetoricians that are targeted in 161 BC. And so this reaction against skilled immigrants is not Roman tradition. It's instead an innovation dressed up as tradition. Now, what we see is this extends in a complicated way even into Roman military life. So an example of the complexity that Romans have and the complex relationship that Romans have with Greek culture is perhaps best illustrated by the case of Rome's interaction with Archimedes. So Archimedes is the best mathematician of his day. He's a mathematician who was living at the time of the Second Punic War, living in Syracuse. And when Syracuse flips against Rome and joins Carthage in the Second Punic War, Rome has to undertake a really significant operation to try to reduce the city. And what Livy says is this operation launched by Rome against Syracuse was launched with such strength behind it that it might well have proved successful had it not been for the presence in Syracuse of one individual, Archimedes. And you see these pictures actually come from 16th century, early 17th century paintings by a man named Giulio Parigi, and they illustrate Archimedes' scientific innovations that he uses against the Romans in this war. So this is something that's actually called Archimedes' claw, and it's a very imaginative reconstruction. What Parigi is assuming is that the claw is actually a claw. It's actually a hand that picks up and flips Roman ships. It's probably something a lot more simple, more like maybe a large grapple or something that tears the ship apart rather than lifting it up and flipping it like it's the Hulk. But what we see when Livy describes this is Archimedes was unrivaled in his knowledge of astronomy, and he was even more remarkable as the inventor and constructor of types of military equipment by the aid of which he was able, by one finger as it were, to frustrate the most laborious operations of the enemy. And here we see another example of an Archimedean invention that Parigi illustrates. And this one's a little more possible, a little more plausible. It's basically a mirror where the sun's rays are reflected back into a Roman ship, and kind of like a laser beam, it causes the ship to go up in flames. But Livy tells us that he builds these crazy claws, mirror weapons, catapults, and other things that just continually keep the Romans at bay because they are so novel the Romans don't know how to counteract them. Basically what we get is a figure who is a sort of prototypical Greek Hellenistic genius. And he's a person who represents all of the best features of Greek culture. He's a polymath, a scientist who also understands basic principles of logic, mathematics, and also how to practically apply them to more important problems. Now, all accounts, such as they are, present his death as an encounter between Romans and a Greek cultural figure. And so the stories about the death of Archimedes allow us to see this kind of conflict between Roman suspicion of Greek culture and Roman respect for Greek culture. So there's three versions of the death of Archimedes that we have in our sources. Version 1, that's found in both Plutarch and Livy's account, says that Archimedes was intensely working out a problem by diagrams, and he failed to notice that Syracuse had been taken over. So one of the stories we have is that many brutalities were committed in hot blood and the greed of gain, and it's on record that Archimedes, while intent upon figures that he'd traced in the dust, and regardless of the hideous uproar around him, was killed by a soldier who didn't know who he was. And so this is supposed to indicate to us that the person who killed Archimedes wasn't a Roman intent on attacking Greeks. It was an ignorant soldier who didn't quite understand why this man was drawing in the dust, and just killed him because in the anger that followed the sack of the city and the capture of the city, people die. And this soldier didn't know who he had killed. And so what we have here is a text that tries to say, in essence, Romans are ignorant, but some Romans are ignorant. This particular soldier was ignorant and didn't know who he had killed. The next story that we have comes from a Latin source, and it has a little qualifier at the end that changes the impact. And this also comes from Livy. So Livy tells us that following the death of Archimedes, Marcellus, the commander of the Roman forces, was distressed at his death. And so he had Archimedes properly buried, and his relatives were found. And to these, the name and memory of Archimedes were an honor and a protection. And so what we have then is a regular random soldier kills Archimedes because he doesn't know who he is, but the cultivated and cultured commander Marcellus does know who Archimedes is. And he gives Archimedes the honor that a figure of Archimedes' status very much deserves. And so what we see here is a sort of qualifier. Some Romans don't know Archimedes. Some Romans don't respect Greek culture. Some Romans don't respect this paradigm of Greek cultural and scientific achievement. But not all Romans are so ignorant. Marcellus, the commander, is not ignorant of who Archimedes was. He knows who he was, he knows why he's valuable, and he honors him. And this is the so-called tomb of Archimedes in Syracuse, in Sicily. The story that we have about the tomb of Archimedes is quite interesting, because supposedly the tomb that is constructed following Archimedes' death, it's forgotten about for a long time, and Cicero finds it in 75 BC when he's visiting. And Cicero says what a shame it is the tomb of Archimedes has been abandoned, and he tries to make sure that the Syracusans again pay attention to Archimedes and give him the honor that he's due. This is called the tomb of Archimedes, this particular archaeological site. It is almost certainly not the tomb of Archimedes. It seems to come from a much later period. But the reason it's called the tomb of Archimedes is because it's the most prominent ancient tomb on that particular site. And so is it the tomb of Archimedes? Probably not. But it shows the great desire that subsequent people have to find the tomb of Archimedes and give reverence to this honorable person. Now, another version that we have of Archimedes' death, and so this is the qualification of version 1, the random assault and killing of Archimedes by a random Roman soldier who doesn't know better, but Marcellus acknowledging that Archimedes needs to be honored and honoring him because the elite recognize Archimedes' achievements even if the regular soldiers don't. The next version is something that comes in Plutarch's Life of Marcellus, the life of the commander. Plutarch says, according to another account, a Roman came up with a drawn sword and threatened to kill Archimedes then and there. When Archimedes saw him, he begged him to stay his hand for a moment so that he should not leave his theorem imperfect and without its proof. But the soldier paid him no heed and killed him at once. So this is a different kind of story, and this actually is a painting that shows exactly that scene, right? Archimedes, you can see, is working out with a compass on a piece of papyrus, a theorem, and of course Archimedes does his math homework while draped in his sheet. This is of course how it was done in antiquity, and the Roman soldier has his sword ready to kill him, but Archimedes puts up his left hand because he's using his right hand to complete the proof and tries to stay the soldier's sword, and in the background of course you can see Syracuse burning. What Plutarch is telling us is that this is a more significant version even than the version told by Livy of Roman ignorance. The Roman ignorance of this particular Roman soldier And he kills Archimedes not because he doesn't know who he is, but because he doesn't care who he is. In the first account, the Roman soldier is just sort of carried away with anger and sees a guy digging in the dirt and kills him because, you kill people when a city is being sacked, and these things happen. In this case, though, the Roman soldier is informed that Archimedes is doing something important. He's doing something important. He's trying to finish an important mathematical theorem, and he's trying to finish the proof of it, and the Roman soldier doesn't care. And so this actually makes the Romans look worse. It makes the Romans look like they should have understood what Archimedes was up to and why he mattered, and they ignored it anyway. Now, the third version is a version that's actually preserved only in Plutarch's account. And it explains that Archimedes was carrying mathematical equipment back to Marcellus when he was killed because the guards thought he might be carrying gold. Now that third version, actually suggests quite strongly that Marcellus did really, very truly appreciate Archimedes to the degree to which he wished to actually learn from Archimedes. And it's just a misunderstanding that leads to Archimedes' death. Now, all of these things suggest the complicated relationships of Greeks and Romans, and particularly a complicated relationship that centered on ideas of Greek culture in a Roman context. Because these are stories that go back and forth between Greek and Roman accounts. Everybody agrees that Archimedes was killed in the Roman capture of Syracuse. The question is, what does this mean? Is this just a random event, and the Roman commander, when he realizes this random event occurs, he tries to do his best to kind of make up for the cultural damage that his soldiers had accomplished? Or is the Roman commander not involved at all? It's just a random attack by a Roman soldier who knows Archimedes is doing math and is doing important cultural work and doesn't care. That's something that reflects quite poorly on Romans. The last version, though, is that Archimedes and Marcellus are actually going to collaborate with each other. Roman and Greek are going to come together to improve things and to learn from each other. And it's only an accident, in a sense, that prevents this from happening. But in each of these three accounts of the death of Archimedes, we see a slightly different version of what Roman and Greek cultural interactions are. In the first version, regular Romans don't really understand what Greeks are up to. They don't really understand why this culture is valuable, but elite Romans do. In the second version, regular Romans are informed about what is going on, and they don't care at all. It's not that they're ignorant, it's that they're malicious. In the third version, Romans and Greeks are going to work together. They're going to learn from each other, and it's just simply a misunderstanding that prevents this from happening. In each of these, though, we see this sort of tension between Greek and Roman misunderstandings of the intentions of each of the others. And it's into this mix that we can turn and understand the project undertaken by Polybius. Polybius is an interesting figure. He's born in the city of Megalopolis, and he's held as a Greek hostage following the Third Macedonian War that ended in 168 BC. He's the son of an important politician in the Achaean League, and so he's deported along with all of those hostages that Rome took following the victory in 168. And when he's in Rome, Polybius becomes a member of a literary circle that also involved Scipio Africanus the Younger, the person who will eventually conquer and destroy the city of Carthage. Now, Polybius, while he's in Rome, because he's so closely associated with Scipio Africanus II, or otherwise known as Scipio Aemilianus, because he's so closely associated with this prominent person in Roman life, he becomes very familiar with the way that Roman political life works. And so Polybius writes a history that's written in Greek to describe Roman history to Greeks. Now, Romans could read this, of course. We're in the middle of the 2nd century BC. Scipio, of course, could read Greek. Most educated Romans could read Greek, but this is a history that educated Romans could read, but Polybius is hoping that actually Greeks will read, because he's writing this after 146 BC. He's writing this after Rome has become not only the dominant force in Greek politics, but also now the imperial power that's controlling significant parts of the Greek world. And what he's trying to do is explain to Greeks how this culturally and militarily backward place in the Western Mediterranean is able to come in and supplant Greeks as the dominant power, the dominant military force in the Mediterranean, and how it is that this particular place that's so culturally and technologically backwards can overcome the much superior culture and technology of the Greek world. And what Polybius basically says is that the Romans are not to be seen as savage or uncultured people. They're instead supposed to be respected as a resourceful people that, in a way, are practically living at a political level that was only theorized by Greeks. An essential feature of why this is the case is in Polybius's view, is because of the nature of the Roman constitution. And what Polybius says is, this is fundamentally a theoretical question. What is an effective constitution? But in the Greek context, Greeks have only theorized this. They haven't actually realized a perfect constitution. And what Polybius is effectively going to say is that the political constitution theorized by Plato in his Republic is brought to actual reality by the Romans, not because they theorized it, but because they built it. They practically constructed this constitution. They didn't theorize it and try to implement it. Instead, they just did it. And so Polybius feels that the way that you can see this is by actually looking at what the Romans are doing. And he says the true test of a perfect man is the power of bearing with spirit and dignity violent changes of fortune, and an examination of a constitution should be conducted in the same way. And therefore, because I'm unable to find in our day a more rapid or signal change than that which happened to Rome, I reserved my disquisition on its constitution for here. This is in Book 6 of Polybius's Histories. It comes just after the string of defeats that Rome suffered to Hannibal between 218 and 216 BC. And Polybius is saying that this is a moment of crisis for Rome. This is a moment when, as in the life of an individual, you can see the true character of an individual by how they deal with misfortune. You can also see the true character of a state by looking at how it deals with misfortune and serious, serious challenges to its survival. And so Polybius says this is the moment, when Rome is pressed by Hannibal, this is the moment when we should examine Rome's constitution. And so what Polybius then does is he introduces the reader to an idea of progressions of constitutions that Plato develops in his Republic. What Plato says in essence is, the earliest way that people organize their societies is by choosing the best person and making them a king. And the king then rules justly and rules capably, but eventually kingship degenerates, and instead of being something where the best person rules justly, it just becomes something where an individual just rules. And that's a tyranny. That's a tyranny because the person is running things not because of a concern for the best interests of everyone, but because of his own personal best interests. And what Plato then says is tyrannies are overthrown by aristocracies. And aristocracy, quite literally in the Greek world, means, in Greek, power by the best. It means a state run by the best people. And so this, again, is a structure that has real virtue, because instead of a malevolent dictator who's in charge of the state and simply doing things for his own benefit, a group of the most virtuous people in the society get together, overthrow him, and restructure society so that it can be governed in a fashion that preserves the best interests of everyone. But again, this degenerates, and you move from a government by the best people, an aristocracy, to just a government by a few people. This is an oligarchy, meaning literally rule of a few. And this is when the aristocracy stops looking out for the best interests of everybody, but it becomes a kind of closed group that uses the state just to benefit itself. And frequently, then, when this happens, the people rise up, the demos. And the people rise up and overthrow the rule of the few and create then a government by the people. Democracy, demokratia, literally means empowered people. And the power of the people is originally something that is run for the common good of everyone. But over time, the consensus about what the good of everyone is breaks down into factionalism. And the factions then start fighting, and instead of a group of a population, a group of citizens that come together to run the state for the best interests of everybody, instead you have a degeneration into basically everybody looking out for themselves. And Plato says that then leads to a sort of restarting of the cycle with somebody coming forward and establishing just government run by one individual. And so this is the progression of constitutions. And what Plato will say, what Plato does say, is that each of these constitutions, on the good side, kingship, aristocracy, and democracy, each of these constitutions has real virtue. There are really important positive things that they create, but they also have vices. And over time, the virtue gets overwhelmed by the vice, and the good constitution becomes corrupted into a bad version of itself. And so kingship degenerates into tyranny because the virtues of kingship degenerate into the kind of selfish and individualized vices of tyranny. And so what Polybius says, again, working off of Plutarch, what Polybius says, again, working off of Plato, is it's plain that we must regard as the best constitution that which partakes of all three elements that are good: kingship, aristocracy, and democracy. But none of the bad elements. That's unstated, but it's clear. And this is no mere assertion, Polybius says, but it's been proven by the example of Lycurgus, the king of Sparta, who was the first to construct a constitution on this principle. And the reason, Polybius will go on to say, is because in each constitution there's both a virtue and a vice. But if you have a constitution that partakes of only the virtuous elements of each form, so kingship, aristocracy, and democracy, they can together counteract the vices inherent of each of those forms of constitutions. So in a kingship, the desire for absolute power is the vice that undermines the virtue of a king. In an aristocracy, the lust for money is what causes the degeneration of a constitution based on rule by the best and most virtuous people into just simply a government by the few people. And in democracy, it's a sort of contentiousness about prestige. And that breaks democracy down into this kind of mob rule where different factions fight amongst each other. But the positive aspects of kingship, aristocracy, and democracy can check the emergence of the negative aspects of each of these things. You can get a constitution that is all virtue and prevents the vices from ever developing. And what Polybius then says is the Roman constitution is balanced. The Roman constitution contains elements of kingship, aristocracy, and democracy in the appropriate balance so that the virtue of each of those things can be manifested, but the vices are controlled. And so Polybius goes on to say that all three of these elements are present. The consulship has elements of kingship. Consuls, Polybius says, are able to summon meetings, lead armies, inflict punishment on those who serve under them, all of the things that a king can do effectively. But the Senate also plays a vital role. The Senate is the aristocracy in Polybius's view, the rule of the best. And the Senate, Polybius says, has control of the treasury, and it also receives foreign ambassadors, and answers are returned from foreign ambassadors and are decided by the Senate. And so in essence, the Senate controls money, it controls foreign relations, and then the people. This is the democratic element. The people are the only court to decide matters of life and death. And again, it's the people who bestow offices, which are the rewards of virtue, on the deserving. And they have the absolute power of passing or repealing laws. And most important of all, it's the people who deliberate on the question of peace and war. And so Polybius has then explained how each of these individual types of constitutions are represented in the Roman state. And each type then exercises its virtues in Rome through various elements of Roman life. The kingship's virtues are exercised through the consulship, the aristocracy's virtues are exercised through the Senate, and the democracy's virtues are exercised through the people. He then explains how the vices of each of these constitutions are checked by other elements of the Roman state. So if you begin with kingship, the vice of kingship is the desire for absolute power. And Polybius says this is checked because the consul, although to all appearances is absolute in the administration of business, still he has the need of the support both of the people and the Senate, because without a decree of the Senate, his legions cannot be supplied with food or clothes or pay, so that the plans of a commander will be futile if the Senate is resolved to hamper his plans. But the consul is also checked by the people. As for the people, the consuls are permanently obliged to court their favor, because when laying down their office, they have to give an account of their administration before the people. And this means that the people can accuse a consul of maladministration, they can accuse a consul of behaving illegally, they can punish a consul if he has done those things. And so this means that the Senate and the people can both restrict the power of a consul. And the consul then may desire absolute power, but the Senate and the people can prevent him from ever actually realizing that desire. Now, the next aspect of the balanced constitution is the aristocratic element, which Polybius says is represented by the Senate. And the vice of the aristocratic element, Polybius will say, is the desire for money. But this too is checked. Polybius says, as for the Senate, it possesses the power I've described, but in the first place, it's obliged in public affairs to take the wishes of the multitude into account and respect what the people ask for. So if the tribunes, the representatives of the people, impose their veto, the Senate not only is unable to pass a decree, it cannot even hold a meeting at all. And so what Polybius is saying is the greed of the aristocratic element is restricted because the people have the power to prevent the Senate from even meeting. And so if the Senate wants to do something to enrich itself, if the Senate is verging on degenerating into an oligarchy, the people can basically shut the Senate down. They have that power. Polybius also says, of course, the consul has power against the Senate because the consul controls the military. And so there is also an implicit threat. If the Senate is behaving in that way, it doesn't actually have control over the use of force in a fashion that will allow it to impose its will without any sort of response. People do not fear the Senate. They respect the Senate. And the Roman balance of powers makes it so the Senate is respected, but it cannot assert itself in a way that allows it to degenerate into an oligarchy. And the final element is the people of the democratic part of the Constitution. And Polybius says that the vice of the people is their desire for reputation and the way that this can cause a degeneration from a democracy that looks out for the best interests of everybody into kind of the factionalism of mob rule, in which individual leaders are bringing people together and contesting with each other out of a desire to accelerate their own prominence and their own careers. Now, Polybius says the people are far from being independent of the Senate and are bound to take its wishes into account both individually and collectively, for contracts too numerous to count are given out in all parts of Italy, and in all of these the people are engaged. And over these transactions, the Senate has absolute control, and so it can grant an extension of time. It can even relieve the contractors of their responsibility. So Polybius says that the people's desire for reputation is to a degree counteracted by the fact that there are so many contracts on offer in Italy that the Senate can exercise an economic brake on the people and the leadership, the popular leadership, that might push democracy towards factionalism. But the consuls also restrain the people because Polybius says all citizens are cautious about actively opposing or resisting the consuls. And for this reason, men do not rashly reject or resist the wishes of consuls because one and all may be subject to their absolute authority on campaign. And so Polybius claims that the consuls can restrain the bad impulses of the democratic element through fear. Because the consuls control the military, because lots of Romans serve in the military, there is a natural respect for the consuls and the force that the consuls may be able to deploy. And so Polybius concludes, The result of this power of several types of authority is so firm that for all emergencies, a better constitution is impossible to find. And accordingly, the peculiar constitution of the Roman state makes it irresistible and certain of obtaining whatever it determines to attempt. And so what Polybius is arguing here is that you have in the Roman constitution a very real balance of power, where you have the command structure under the consulship that mirrors that of a king. Decisions can be made effectively. There is strong leadership in military affairs. And so the virtue of kingship is there. But the vice that leads to the attempt to claim absolute power is something that is prevented by the Senate and the people. Similarly, the Senate is a body made up by the best people in the society, and those people contribute positively by providing input on foreign affairs, by providing input on economic activities, and providing input on laws and other actions that the state takes. They are then doing the best thing that they can do, which is to collectively, as the most established and wise men in the Roman state, guide policy. But they are not ever able to fall into the trap of furthering their own economic interests and creating an oligarchy. Instead, the consuls and the people check this. Similarly, the people have the democratic elements of the state have the ability of bringing together the people in such a fashion that they can build consensus for policies and initiatives that the Roman state undertakes. But the Senate, through the economic power that it has, and the consuls, through the military power they have, can prevent a degeneration of the democratic element into factionalism and mob rule. And so Polybius says that these things are so acutely and carefully balanced that all of the virtues in each of those constitutions are manifest in Rome, but none of the vices appear. They are all controlled. And this is a really wonderful idea. But as we move into the second half of the 2nd century BC, we see that all of these aspects that Polybius identifies as vices and that he claims are checked by the Roman constitution start emerging in ways that are unchecked. And over the next 50 years, what we will see is those things, when they emerge, the Roman constitution proves unable to adapt. It proves unable to restrict the emergence of those vices. And each of these constitutions in the next 50 years after Polybius writes will all degenerate in their own way into a situation where the Senate is behaving like an oligarchy, the consuls are behaving like tyrants, and the populace is degenerating into factionalism. And so Polybius is writing at a moment where everything looks like it's working out. But what we will see is the germ of the degeneration of each of these components of the Constitution is already there. And Rome is about to enter a period of really profound political crisis that will last for a century and will lead to the end of the Roman Republic.